Last week when I was building this chair in my playroom, well, attempting to build this chair in my playroom, you may have noticed that the playroom is a bit of a mess. So this week I decided to fix that by building something that I've been putting off for a couple of years. A bookshelf toy storage bench between these two pillars here and under this window. But it's not going to be a regular bookshelf bench. I have this idea that I can use steel as the dividers without knowing how to weld, because I don't know how to weld. And the space between here is just about 10 feet long. So that would be really expensive to use hardwoods to make this. So I'm going to use plywood and then use some hardwood veneer on top of that. So I'll be building 10-foot long plywood shelves and also experimenting with the no-weld steel dividers. I'm 75% sure that this is going to work. So I have a backup plan that is 100%, well, let's say 99% going to work. Promise I'll get back to this chair when the weather warms up, but for now, let's get going on this. This whole thing is going to be made out of one full sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. And based on the material that I have, I'll have to break the bookshelf into 3 40-inch sections to make it 10 feet long. This square from TSO is so helpful when breaking down plywood with a track saw. These cuts are square without any additional setup. It's a luxury tool for sure, but it's really awesome to have. So after cross-cutting the sections, I could then rip them to their final width of 11 inches at the table saw. And just in case my cross-cutting measurements were a little off with the track saw, I took a piece from each section and split them for the top and bottom of the shelf. This way, the total measurement for the top and bottom pieces will be the same, if that makes sense. Without moving the table saw fence, I then ripped another piece to that same 11 inches width as the whole unit, and then rip that into strips that are going to be glued and screwed to the bottom of the unit to join the plywood sections. Next, I want the shelves to appear thicker than they actually are. So I'll double up the plywood just at the fronts. They'll go in between the connector pieces that I just cut. So I ripped up some more strips and just lined it up on the actual project to get the correct dimensions for these pieces and cut them on the miter saw. Perfect fit without needing to know exactly how long these are. Love it. I cut the rest of those pieces and made sure to mark which one goes where because I had to take it all apart to prep it for the veneer and to bring it inside. I decided to order paper-backed veneer instead of making my own to save on time and to just try it out. You see me opening 2 boxes here. That's because if you're going to veneer one side of a board, you have to balance it out and veneer the opposite side so there's an equal amount of material on both sides. I'm going to start with that balanced backer veneer first, since it won't ever be seen and it's good practice before the main event. I cut it slightly oversized to width with a utility knife and a cutting mat to make sure I don't cut up my floor. Then I cut them to length. There'll be a total of 6 main shelf pieces here. I did a ton of research before I started this project because I didn't know which adhesive to use for this kind of veneer. And I discovered this awesome stuff called Better Bond Titan DX. It's a water-based contact cement that actually works really well. It's low odor, easy to clean up, and has a long open time. Not sponsored, by the way. It was pretty simple to apply. My only issue was figuring out how to hold these curled up pieces in place. But I quickly solved that with some rolled up tape on the floor. Now that the adhesive is dry on both parts, as soon as they contact each other, they will stick permanently. So I laid down some pieces of scrap on top of the board. Round dowels would have been better, but use what you got. Then I made sure the veneer was hanging around on all sides, and I started to remove the scrap pieces one by one to bond the veneer to the plywood. The most important thing here was to get all of the air bubbles out and to put pressure on it so it gets stuck on there. The website that I found, the contact cement, specifically said not to use a J-roller, but to use a veneer scraper. I don't have one of those, so I just used a scrap piece of plywood to make sure that the two surfaces were really bonded well together and there were no bubbles. I let these set up overnight and then used a flush trim bit in my trim router to clean up all of the excess. I decided to use the base for my 6-in-1 trim router jig so that I had more surface area resting on the wood and the router would be more stable. This was especially handy when rounding the corners. Awesome. Using the marks I drew earlier, I place everything back in their correct spots so that I can cut some more supports that the steel will go into, and so that I could mark out exactly where the steel is going to go. This is important to do now because all these pieces are going to be connected to each other using screws, and I want to make sure that there aren't any screws where the steel is going to go. So I pre-drilled and countersunk a bunch of holes, making sure to avoid the steel areas, and then brought it all back inside because I can't glue outside when it's freezing. Don't forget your tools. This time I smartened up and laid down a drop cloth to protect my floors and laid out all the pieces according to the marks I drew earlier and started the glue up process. Put on a bunch of glue and tacked it with a couple of brads just to make sure that it wouldn't move as I drove in all of the screws. This was going swimmingly until... Glad I caught this one on time. I just realized that I'm screwing on the wrong side. I'm screwing on the side that I didn't veneer yet. So I'm gonna undo. Glad I caught it right now. So I come prepared with wet paper towels. Take two. How awful would that have been if I didn't realize that when I did? Anyway, the hardest part about this was making sure that the connecting pieces of plywood were really right next to each other. If I was in my shop, I would have used clamps to help with that, but yeah, glue and winter just don't mix well together. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. And now we have 10-foot long plywood.
Yay!
Nice.
And that 10-foot long plywood is going to need 10-foot long edge banding. To rip something that long on my table saw, I need to turn my saw on an angle to make room. And that's where all my pencils go. Cool. It was really helpful to have a roller stand like the one I was using to support the piece when it goes beyond my outfeed table. The roller stand also came in handy as the outfeed support at my planer, which I also had to move to a different location to accommodate these really long pieces. And I applied this edge banding before applying the top white oak veneer. I started with the ends first. This way, when you edge band the front, it will cover the end grain of those side pieces and it will look cleaner from the front. Just some wood glue and tape as clamps will suffice here. Before applying the front edge banding, I used a flush trim saw to cut off all of the excess. I love this one because the teeth have no set, so it doesn't mar the face of your project. I'll link to it and other awesome tools from WOODCRAFT down below. Now I can apply the front veneer the same way, using glue and tape as clamps. I chose to use hardwood edge banding for two reasons. One, my kids' toys and books will be stored here, so I expect them to be beaten up quite a bit when they're taking stuff in and out of the shelf, so I wanted something that was going to be really durable. Two, because this was 3 separate pieces of plywood attached together, it's just one more point to make that connection stronger. So this whole thing will be strong, stable, and durable, definitely worth the extra effort for me. Once the glue dried, I had to take them back out to the shop to clean it all up. So as I'm cleaning this up, I'm seeing that it's a little bit gappy, like a little bit too gappy for my liking, but really doesn't matter because it's going to be all covered up with the veneer anyway. If I was in my shop, I would have probably prevented that gappiness from happening by clamping these two together. Like this edge against that edge, and then clamping those boards together to get the best pressure on the two pieces. But I wasn't in my shop and I just really didn't want to have to carry in all of my clamps. Just the struggles that I have to go through in the wintertime in my shop. But it's going to be covered up anyways, and I'm fine with it. Seriously, I love using this flush trim saw. to flush up all of this edge banding, I'm going to use my trim router with my 6-in-1 router jig. So of course you can use a flush trim router bit, and you could just hold your router on its edge and ride it. Actually, you wouldn't use one of these. Hold on. You would use one of these with the bearing on the bottom, and you would go on the edge like this, and it would flush up the trim to the plywood. But it's a little bit unwieldy to hold a router on the edge of a surface like this. They make some sort of jigs where like there's like a thing that protrudes out and it supports on here. But part of my 6-in-1 trim router jig is that it's easy to flush up edge banding because of this side fence. And also I could get into this tight corner here because of this extra 45-degree base that's on there. I'm going to be able to go into that corner, flush everything up, and then I'll move the fence so that this part over here is going to be touching the edge banding, but these parts over here are inset a little bit so they won't get in the way of the router bit. To set the bit height, I use a piece of paper so the bit is just above the height of the plywood. This ensures that you don't dig into the plywood at all, and then you just route away. The base is stable because of the wide base on my left, your right, and it can easily get into the corner because of the angles cut into it. Then, like I mentioned before, I adjusted the other attachment on the base so that it adds more support along the piece as you're routing the edge banding flush. I love this little jig. It made this whole process so quick and easy. Everything just needed a quick sanding after that, especially on top where I'll be applying the white oak veneer. I paid extra special attention to all the areas where the pieces meet to make sure they're really flush. Back inside for more glue time. This time I smartened up again and I laid out the veneer overnight with some heavy books on each corner to try and flatten it out as much as possible and cut it to width. I'm really happy that I decided to do the bottom of the shelves first, and that way I learned some things before I got to the larger top. Like, it was really important to focus on the edges, also to uncurl the piece overnight so that it becomes as straight as possible. And if you get some adhesive on your arm, clean it off before you put your sweatshirt back on. So while I'm applying the adhesive, just a quick break to talk about this week's sponsor, Audible. I'm sure that you guys have all heard about Audible already. It's even in Weezer's latest song, Grapes of Wrath. Fun fact, Weezer was actually my favorite band when I was in 6th grade, and I have been obsessed with music ever since, if you couldn't tell from my musical inspired builds here on YouTube. But sometimes I need to take a break from listening to music to listen to people talking about music, and that's where Audible comes in. With an Audible Plus membership, you have access to thousands of titles, not just audiobooks, but original entertainment like comedy, theatrical performances, and podcasts. I'm currently listening to the Broken Record podcast, where a bunch of journalists and Rick Rubin interview musicians about their life and their inspirations and just their craft in general. There's even an episode with Weezer's lead singer, Rivers Cuomo, and I learned that some people actually think that Rivers Cuomo is Kurt Cobain. So it was a really interesting listen and really fun to listen to. And what's really cool about the Audible app is that if I pause it while I'm listening on my phone, I could then pick it up on any of my devices where I have the app installed, and it will start right where I paused, and I don't have to miss anything. So I think it's pretty cool. Audible Plus is free for new members for 30 days. So give it a try and visit audible.com/Tamar or text Tamar to 500-500. That's audible.com/Tamar, my name, or text my name, Tamar, Tamar, to 500-500. And if you guys listen to any other musical podcasts, I'd love to hear your recommendations. Thank you, Audible, for sponsoring this video. Now back to the veneer. And now to do that all over again for the second shelf. So the contact cement rolls on white, and you have to wait until it dries to actually attach the two pieces together. So it only sticks to itself once it's dry on both pieces. This takes about 30 minutes or so, and you'll know that it's dry when it's no longer tacky and it looks glossy. Lifting and moving this long veneer is totally a two-person job, by the way, but I made it work thanks to cutting them way oversized, so it was more forgiving. After that's set up, back in my shop in the snow so I could flush trim the veneer. Once again, that extra long router base kept the router stable. I really liked using it, especially around the corners.
Oh, that looks good.
The shelves are all covered and edge banded and veneered, and they're all cleaned up. Time for the steel dividers. These are 1/4 inch thick and 6 inches wide, and I ordered them online pre-cut to the size that I needed for this. The only work that I needed to do was just to clean up some of the rust. I actually like the way that the mill scale looks on the steel, so I left some of that black color on there. But I made sure to clean the bottoms and round off the edges, which will be helpful later during assembly. I'm going to make dados in both pieces that will fit the metal. I figured the best shot I had to making sure that these would line up was to cut both dados at the same time by tightly clamping the boards together and to use my hinged router edge guide jig. And I'm not just eyeballing it here. Off camera, I actually marked out the layout lines based on what I did way back in the beginning of the video when I was pre-drilling the holes. I was pretty nervous to cut into the veneered top, but this router edge guide just makes it so easy. Just need to line it up with your center line, clamp it down, flip up the flap, and plunge your router until your mark. Awesome. One last step before final assembly was to add on some feet or risers. I don't really know what to call them, but they raise the whole shelf up so that it's not flat on the floor. I thought this would just look cooler this way, and I just used whatever scrap that was left over to make these. They really won't be seen. All right, time to assemble everything. So this time I brought my clamps inside because this is like a crucial moment right here. So to attach the steel to the shelves, I'm going to use this epoxy from Moss called Crackzilla. Whoever came up with this name needs a raise. So basically, you put on like one of these tips over here and it mixes inside of there, and you put it inside a caulk gun and it easily goes into like cracks. That's hence the name Crackzilla. It also needs a theme song. Okay, I am a little nervous to do this right now. So, whew. All right, let's do it. Crackzilla, love it. Before applying it though, I just masked off the holes with some painter's tape so the squeeze out won't ruin the white oak. And we're ready to assemble. I did a few test squeezes to see how quickly the epoxy comes out. I think this whole delivery mechanism for this epoxy is pretty cool and easy to use. I kept a paper plate nearby and ready to catch any drips, but it actually wasn't dripping at all and it wasn't necessary, but better to be safe than sorry. I'm really excited to use this stuff to fill knots and cracks in the future. It's good stuff. Then I just placed all the steel dividers in the epoxy-filled holes. It was really satisfying when they just pressed right into place. I can't decide if I want to put the top on now with epoxy or put the top on now just to get everything set on the bottom. I don't know what I'm going to do. I kind of just want to get this over with. So I think I'm going to put epoxy on the top now. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. Okay. If I just like do it controlled, like on top of the pieces. Woo. All right, I'm gonna do it. Hopefully it doesn't drip down. Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, awesome. Okay, it's like super controlled on top. Okay. Ah, I have a hole in my glove. How about just a dab? And hold them. This might be a mistake, but we'll see. Okay. Ready? You ready for this? To get everything aligned. This is totally a two-person job also. There we go. Woo! Yeah, oh my God, it's working. So it was a good idea. Awesome. Some of the pieces just needed to be tapped lightly one way or the other, and they went right into the dados. Woo! They're all in. Okay, I'm gonna clamp them up. I was panicking to get clamps on here in a hurry because I'm used to 20-minute open time of regular wood glue. This epoxy has a 2-hour open time, so I could have totally taken my sweet time here. Regardless, I got it done. I cleaned up the squeeze out and peeled off the tape when it was still wet, and it's ready for finish. When I built my record player stand, there were 2 popular questions. Where'd you get that now playing stand, and what finish did you use? So at the time I was still experimenting with the finish that I used, and I didn't want to share it yet because I wasn't sure if I was going to like it. But after a few months of experimenting with it, I can say that it's Walrus oil furniture finish, and I absolutely love this stuff. It's all natural, it smells great, there's no added dryers, and it makes the wood look awesome. So easy to apply as well. So this is made of polymerizing safflower oil, perilla seed oil, hemp seed oil, and it has a hint of lime. So it just smells so good. So with using a natural finish, there are just a few things to note. It takes longer to cure than, let's say, a lacquer. But I'm willing to take that trade-off because of the natural properties in it. So there's also a learning curve in learning how to apply it. I apply the Walrus oil furniture finish on the whole piece and just spread it around with a rag. Not only is it really easy to apply, it also doesn't turn the wood orange like a lot of other oil finishes do. I really like the more natural look that this oil gives. The oil needs some time to actually soak into the wood fibers, so it's recommended that you leave it as is for about 24 hours. So don't touch it for a day and then come back after 24 hours and rub off all of the excess. You can leave this as is, but I found that my pieces look better with a second coat. So I just repeat the same process and then wait for it to fully dry. So since this is all natural stuff with no added dryers, it might take a few days or maybe even up to a week for it to actually dry. And just because it's dry, it doesn't mean that it's fully cured. That can actually take a couple of weeks or even up to a month. But I am totally okay with that trade-off. This is sitting here in my house, in my kids' playroom. So I want the safest possible finish for myself and my family. So during that cure time, all you really need to worry about is keeping liquids off of the surface. But after it cures, I promise you it will be awesome. But if you want it to be even more awesome and add even more water protection and more richness to the wood, you can add a coat of Walrus oil furniture wax. This is made of all the same natural ingredients, but a little wax is added as well. So after I apply the oil, I wait a couple of days or even a week to apply the wax because I want to make sure that the oil is dried first. Just rub it on with a rag, wait an hour, and then buff away the excess. Again, same as the finish, it might take up to a week for it to fully dry, but I'm perfectly okay with that. I'd rather wait it out than have my kids inhale lacquer fumes as they're playing. Also, what's pretty cool about this finish is that if you ever feel like it needs a touch-up, just add another coat of wax and just do that same process. Rub on some wax, wait an hour, buff it off, and it will look like new again. Now for the steel, I really want to keep this industrial looking, like I like the mill scale on there. So I'm just going to add some wax, and Walrus oil makes a wood wax that has beeswax in it. I personally use this for cutting boards and things like that, but I think it's gonna be great on the steel here. I'll just rub it on and then buff away the excess. I actually glued some felt to the bottom feet things before I assembled this so that it wouldn't scratch the floor when I was putting it into place. And because it's super heavy. And the strength test. I think it's good. Just load it up with some toy boxes, books, and pillows, and it's done. Come on, like how cool is the steel in there? It just makes it look so light and airy. It's just such a cool, it's like kind of like it's floating. It like looks like it was like just made for this little spot here, because it was. But I'm just so happy with this, and I really needed a win after the chair last week. So I am so thrilled with how this turned out. Lots of experimenting. The steel, I wasn't sure if it was going to work. My backup plan, if it wasn't going to support everything, I thought maybe it would be like side to side. I don't know. My backup plan was to just add another backer plywood piece and just attach it with pocket holes to the top and bottom. That would have totally worked, but it wasn't necessary. I experimented with these veneers. I've never done this kind of process before. I've always just made my own shop sawn veneers and just applied it with wood glue and a caul clamping situation. I prefer to make my own, but for something big like this, I think that I would require a drum sander and also a vacuum press. So I'm gonna have to wait until I get those tools until I tackle a large project like this with my own shop sawn veneers. So thanks to this week's sponsors, WOODCRAFT, Audible, and Walrus Oil. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Oh, I'm so happy with how this turned out. All right, I'm gonna have my kids go through all the toys, and we're gonna give away everything that they don't want, and they're gonna fill this up. I'm so excited to get this space in order. All right, come into the playroom.
Wow!
You did it!
What do you guys think?
I like it.
It's good.
I like it.
Yeah?
It's good.
Yeah.
It's gooder.
Sit on it.
You can sit on it.
Yeah, that one's gonna be like.
Did you staple it to the wall?
No. And what I want you guys to do actually is to go through all the toys that we have in the playroom.
Okay.
And
Put them in the basket.
well, not all of them. Only the ones that we want to keep.
Okay, well, that's good.
So not most of
So
them.
you're out. You don't want to help.
Mom, you finally did it.
Well, you didn't really go through that, did you? You just dumped it.
That's where you got those black baskets for.
Ooh, magnet tiles. Yeah.
I'm gonna organize it.
Ooh, good job. One of my kids put that in the box.
Kids, we have ice cream now.
Ice cream? You want ice cream now?
Yeah.
All right, fine. Where's the power?